G'day guys, welcome back. In today's recording, you're going to be learning about something that is super important for any business to, at some point, get their head around. So over the years, we've been putting a lot of work and a lot of, resource into developing what we're talking about today. However, in coming months, there's going to be some serious development, and we're putting a lot of resource and a lot of time into putting together, a tool that enable you guys to really get a firm understanding on how implementing systems and processes into your business would look for you. And so we're putting together a bunch of products and a bunch of solutions which revolve around everything from system creation, storing the systems, where to access them, how to get your team buying into them. And then we're tying that into as well the really important part of understanding your organizational chart within your business, and then understanding how that organizational chart and that system platform will tie into things like project management and all that kind of thing. So we're really taking a massive step back here, and we're looking at overall how the system world needs to look in order for it to be, executed correctly from a business perspective, because at the moment there's a lot of loose ends and there's a lot of questions that are being thrown around within our community and just in general, I think, in small business that relate to, okay, look, I understand that, we need to have systems and processes in our business, but how does that tie into my org chart, and how does that tie into project management, task management, and that kind of thing? So this is the first podcast that we've recorded on this, and it's actually a screen recording as well. So if you wanted to get a visual representation of what we're talking about here, you can head across to the siteshed.com/systemize, or just type systems into the search bar and it will pop up. But again, the whole purpose of this, guys, is to give you more of a holistic view as to how and what systems look like, and then how it all correlates into your business on a macro level. So there will be a lot more movement in this space. As I said, we're putting a lot of resource and time into it, and there's going to be a lot of developments. And the gentleman that we've got on the show in this recording is Dave Jenyns from SystemHUB down in Melbourne. And for those of you that have been listening to the show for a while, you would be very familiar with Dave. He's been on the show a number of times. He's a system guru, and it's a really fantastic product, a really fantastic podcast recording here where we talk about we're really tying in all those three elements and just bringing them together in a way that I hope for you guys anyway kind of makes a lot of sense, and you can kind of relate it to your business and how your business either should look or does look. So leave some comments if you've got questions. By all means, we will be doing lots of follow-up on this as well. And as I say, there's a lot of product development going into this. So you can head across to the siteshed.com/systems, systemize to get the visual. And if you wanted more information about how this might apply to your business directly, you can head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/systems. And on that page there, that's where we're going to be starting to develop that product a lot. At the moment, it's forming around like a wiki sort of style business. However, that will be developing further and further. And then with people like Dave as well, Dave's got a fantastic product that helps you build systems and processes within your organization called SystemHUB. And so there'll be lots of links to lots of little tools and things like that. But at the end of the day, guys, it's not about which tool you use. It's about understanding the process behind it. And it's about understanding how, by starting to implement these sort of frameworks into your business, how it can effectively replace you in that organization while at the same time building an asset, and an asset that could potentially be acquired by someone one day. So it's all about helping you guys equip yourselves and equip your business with the right tools so that you can scale it effectively and efficiently, and then perhaps one day you can sell it. So that's all from me. Enjoy the show. Please, if you've got any questions, or if you've got any, you wanted any clarification or anything in particular, you can certainly leave a comment there wherever you see this across social media. If you get it via an email, you can reply to the email. Failing that, head across to the siteshed.com and you can reach out to us there. You can sign up for our Toolbox Talks. And if you're not yet in our Facebook community, make sure you do that. It's facebook.com/groups/the Siteshed, and that is an amazing community of global business owners, and everyone there is asking the right questions. So hopefully you're a part of that, and if you're not, get in there. Okay, that's all from me. Ciao.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Toolbox Talks on the Sideshed. And you're joining me today with Dave Jenyns from SystemHUB. Dave, welcome.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to drilling into this in more detail.
Yeah, now Dave, you've been on the show a number of times, and for the regular listeners, they will be familiar with your expertise in the content creation and system realm. You've certainly been building a bit of a brand around that for yourself over the last number of years. And the reason that I've asked you to come on the show today was because we've had a lot of feedback from our community in relation to systems. And I think systems are no longer a dirty word. I think the secret's out. Everyone's kind of like, okay, yep, we need to do this. Let's get it done. However, there is a big disconnect, and it's something that I'm certainly struggling with a little bit in my own business, and I know a lot of our community are. And so I've sort of asked you on the show here, Dave, to dispel some of the myths and educate us with your infinite wisdom on the topic of systems, and I suppose more than that, even just how it all ties in together within the organisation. So we've done episodes before on organisational charts, so a lot of the guys out there are sort of familiar now with how, with the mindset at least, that they need to be sort of building roles and responsibilities into their business that can effectively at some point replace them in certain areas where they may be spending too much time, or maybe where they're not as good at doing something as somebody else in their company may be. And what I really want to do today is I really want to get, within this short series, I really want to get a bit of an overview for the listeners out there so they can understand a little bit about how the organizational chart itself you can take that and you can apply that into departments within an organization, so you can set up systems and procedures, and then from there how you can allocate responsibilities and roles and all that kind of thing. And we want to tie in a little bit of technology as well. And I mean, the technology, there's a lot of programs and stuff out there, and I know obviously you own one called SystemHUB, which is fantastic. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to tie it into a project management tool called Asana, which is one that you've been using for a long time as well. So I think just basically a general overview, which is designed just to clear up a bit of the grey areas, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I would love to. This is a bit of a passion point for me. For the people who do know my previous work at Melbourne SEO and Video, a little over 12 months ago, I was in the fortunate position where we'd systemized our entire business. I stepped out of the daily operations. We hired a CEO, and then she's been running that business for well over a year now. And that's freed me up to work on this passion project. SystemHUB was the little side project for quite some time. It's now very much front and center, my full-time focus. And one thing I noticed with that, it's a platform that houses businesses' standard operating procedures in the cloud. I started to work with different business owners, and I realized when push comes to shove, the business owner doesn't really care what software you're actually using. They just want the result of a systemized business. Yeah. So then I started to go, well, what's stopping people to systemize their business? Where are the challenges coming up? And there's actually quite a few things that seem to be getting in the way, and that's how I came to develop a method we call Systemology, which is a 7-step process to systemize the business. And I try and keep it simple and address the big challenges that the business owner has. I think one of the first ones that a business owner needs to overcome is the feeling that they need to be doing the documentation and the systemization of the business themselves. The fact is they're probably the worst person in the organization to be doing the systemization because they're so caught in the daily operations of running the business. They're typically big picture thinkers as well and get frustrated when they get down to the little detail. So having a process to be able to identify what the critical processes and systems are, being able to then identify the different departments within the organization, and then being able to assign the responsibility to get those documented, having a process for the way that the actual tasks are extracted, like how do you capture how a particular step or process is done, and then how do you organize that? And that kind of takes you through this process. Now, one thing with systemization as well, typically speaking, it works ideally when someone has an existing business that they've already got a little bit of traction on. They've already got clients that they're delivering products and services to. They're clear on what that product or service is and the problems that it solves. And then they're effectively looking to scale it. Sometimes people try and systemize too early in that process, but you haven't yet figured out exactly what it is that you're trying to scale, because systems are all about scale. Also, depending on the size of the team as well, if you are just a one-man band, you need to strip it right back and go super basic, because you're probably on the tools anyway. You're probably pretty busy. The last thing that you need to be thinking about is writing some lengthy procedures. So you need to really strip it back and just have key checkpoints which set you on the right path. So when you do bring team members in, you at least have a framework for them to work from, and then you can start to build out the detail. But that has to come a little bit further down the track.
A lot of our listeners out there, Dave, especially, you know, within the building industry and whatnot, there are some pretty good tools and programs available within the project management realm or job management sort of areas. And they are actually quite good at systemizing the business from a job management out in the field perspective. So like taking the calls, booking the jobs in, dispatching it to different field technicians and all that kind of stuff. The bottleneck, however, you know, people think, oh, I'm running this program, I'm fine, I've got that in place. But what they don't have is, you know, what's supposed to happen within the business in the office, and, you know, all of those management procedures. And it's like it or not, for the better part, there's nearly always, in my experience, nearly has to be two different programs that you're using that can achieve that. So I think what we're talking about here today, and correct me if I'm wrong, is going to be largely focused around that office organizational structure and the systems that are required within, you know, the back end, so that everything can run effectively in the office while the guys are out on site doing all their stuff.
Yeah, exactly right. And it starts off with getting very clear. Step one is all about defining, and you have to get clear on what the critical systems are from start to finish of what we call the critical client flow, or the CCF. It's like the customer journey from both attracting the lead all the way through to delivering that product or service and then getting them to come back. By defining that first, it just keeps you focused. Otherwise, you end up systemizing things that'll have low impact. So I'll open up and I'll give you an example of that. Then there's step number 2 is the assign stage, which is then, well, how do we look at that org chart? How do we then take what we identified in the define stage, allocate it to the appropriate departments? And then we move to step number 3. How do you have a framework to extract out what's actually happening? How do you capture? Oftentimes people try and optimize too early. You first need to capture what you're doing, and then you can go back to optimize. Organizing is just about then how is that structured and where is that stored? Then you move into the optimization. This is kind of, once you've captured what you're doing, you're starting to get a few metrics, and then you can look to improve. Then you also need to have to think about integrate, depending on the size of the team, which is how do you get buy-in and get them to follow the systems and the processes. You know, Jane says, hey, I've always invoiced this way. Why do I need to change my method now? And maybe you've got Joe, who's built a little black box around him, the way that he does his accounting. So he's got job security, and you don't really know what he's doing, but he does that so that you can't get rid of him. And then the final step is around scale. And this is where you start to introduce systems that aren't necessarily covered in the critical client flow. Usually they're things like finding staff, onboarding staff, managing staff. Then it can be some of the finance systems and also the management systems. So that's kind of the direction that we're headed. But I mean, to start off with, we need to look at step number 1, which is the critical client flow. And I'll just...
Before we just do jump into that, Dave, there's an event coming up in Manly, which you're hosting and I'm attending.
Melbourne.
Sorry, what did I say?
Manly.
Manly. All right, sorry.
Yes, both start with M.
Yeah. Anyway, that's coming up, and that is going to be talking about systemology. And I think there's going to be a few tickets that we're going to be giving away or something like that. What are we doing?
Yes, yep. We'll have a little competition to give away one of the tickets. We're almost at capacity there because we're doing it at the Blackman in Melbourne, and it can only take 40 people. I think we're already at about 35. So, but would love to get some of your crew down there, and we're basically going to map out this system, and this system really is designed more for your staff than it is for you. The first couple of steps the business owner will keep an eye on, but then once the team gets going, the aim of the game really is to get them to drive this. So the business owner can focus on the innovation and winning big clients and those sorts of things as it gets to a point, hopefully, where they can step out from the operations.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's hit it.
That's on the 20th of April down here in Melbourne. If they want to find out more, just systemology.com/live. And if you can't make the event, we'll record it anyway. So the first step is what we call the critical client flow. And what someone needs to first do is just get very clear on whatever the central product or service is that they're selling. And also who it is that they're selling to. Because you might be selling a variety of different services, but what is typically the central product where someone might start and then they get introduced to your other products and services. So let's say you're a plumber or something like that. You have to think of what is one central service that you focus on first. Maybe it's unblocking toilets or something like that.
Sorry, I should just interrupt for a second too. For the listeners out there, this is actually also a recorded screencast. So if you guys want to get a visual representation of what we're talking about, you can head across to Facebook or YouTube or the siteshed.com, and this will all be embedded on the web pages there. Sorry, Dave, carry on.
Yeah. You'll need the visual to kind of get this. I think on the left-hand side, it's really you need to identify from the point at which you get the traffic, the awareness of your products and services. So that might be search engine optimization, AdWords, maybe you're doing flyer drops, maybe you're, doing things on LinkedIn or referrals or whatever. How do people become aware of your business? And we're just going to go down the path here on the left-hand side. Then how do people then engage with you? So what is that first engagement piece that gets them to want to stick around or find out more? Then once they're ready to chat with someone, how do they contact you? Is it through a web form fill out? Is it picking up the phone and calling you? Then is there some sort of sales process? Like you'll answer the phone and you need to ask what their problems are. You might then need to do some sort of proposal or quote, go out, check out the job, and then give them a detailed quote. Then do you have some sort of follow-up process? If they don't say, yes, I want to go ahead straight away, this probably would make more sense for larger jobs. Then you move into money. Now, we typically invoice upfront in our industry. Yours might be on completion. Depending on the size of the project, you might even have milestones. And then there's the actual delivery, which has to do with, the onboarding, doing the work, and then handing it over and then getting them to come back. So some of these steps are probably going to get handled in the software that Matt was talking about, probably more focused around the delivery here, but a lot of these front end around how you're capturing those leads, how you're quoting, how you're following up, how you're making sure that you set the expectations right at the start of the job, giving them a timeline and saying, over this period, you can expect the job to get completed. Then you're obviously doing the work, and then what things do you have in place to encourage them to get more work done or come back, or, maybe part of your process is to give them a fridge magnet and have it stuck on their phone. So anytime something pops up, they can give you a call. Yeah. So you map out this first, because of all the things that you could systemize, this is the thing that'll make you money. This is the delivery of the core product or service. Once completed this, that's when you make the money. So systemize that first before you do anything else. Okay. In that systemology process, when we get to scale, then you might handle some of that other those other processes that I was talking about. But this just keeps you focused as well. If you notice here, there's probably 10, 15 top level systems. Now, some of these are going to be more complex than others. Obviously, delivery, you might have a lot of other points on. Some are going to be easier. Some might just be little checklists. But if you get this out, this also helps with explaining the way that your business works to your staff as well. Yep. So that's step one in the process. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah,
Matt?
no, it does completely. And I'm guessing, I don't want to jump the gun here, but I'm guessing we're going to go at some, either pretty soon or down the track somewhere in this talk, we're going to move into how we can then figure out which departments all of these different areas fit into. Is that right?
Step number 2, assign. Okay, there we go. Perfect timing. So then we move into this section here. So the first thing that you need to do is just to think about the departments in your business. Now, some people clump these together. Some people spread them out. Some people will have their own ones. But if you link it back to what happened in the CCF, that'll kind of, again, we just want to keep it very simple as possible. So firstly, you need to think about, well, how do you generate leads? That's usually marketing. How do you then convert that lead? Well, that's sales. How do you then invoice the person? Well, that's finance. How do you do the work? Well, that's the operations or the delivery. Then some of these later ones might end up being more in the scale section, which is, well, how do you manage your staff? That's HR. And then there might be a management piece.
So Dave, one of the issues that, I've been struggling with, and a lot of the guys have sort of given us feedback on in the past, is this structure. And not to say that there's, obviously this kind of follows a very similar system to the Hubbard management system and that kind of, those department structures. But the feedback that we've been getting is, okay, well, there's too many of them, and like, how can we sort of amalgamate them to make them a lot more relevant to, a smaller business?
So the smaller business, you'd say, well, sales and marketing can go together.
Yep.
There's one. Then oftentimes your finance and operations can go together, because that's kind of like around, the delivery of the product or the service. And then you'll also shrink together your HR and your management.
Okay.
So you've really just got 3 when you think about it that way. And that's a great place to start. And the purpose, it depends on the size of your team. If you're a one-man band, just go 3. That's fine. If you've got more than a few staff, then you might start to break it up. And then the purpose of this is to be able to allocate what you identified in the CCF to different sections, and then hopefully have someone in that section who looks after that. So, if you're a smaller business, then you might have someone with you at head office, and they might be handling some of the finance and the operation stuff, logistics, lining up things, pulling in contractors, all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see how this looks when we sort this into something like SystemHUB, where you'll start to see the folder structure match this structure. So then it makes it easier to identify where someone needs to find a system if they're looking for it.
All right, cool.
That will also link into the project management tool. But step 1 is mapping out your departments. Step number 2 then is you start to allocate from your critical client flow into those departments. So traffic, well, that's about sales and marketing. That's getting the word out. Your engagement, whether that's a piece of content or, a webinar or some sort of quote calculator, that's all sales and marketing. Then you've got contact. That's kind of when you first start to chat with someone. That's not even getting to the sales yet. That could fall into your sales and marketing. Then we move into the sales. Well, that's if we're just working with that one category, that's to do with quoting and having, what gets said on those phone calls and how you follow up, how you prepare a quote. All that is going to fall into that category. Then we're moving into the operations, the delivery and the money, like all of that goes together. So if we come back to here, you can see I've highlighted ones that I would consider critical in this business, this is actually for a web development business, but for the, let's say, tradie business, you might go, hey, we don't worry so much about the follow-up, because once we do the quote, we sign them on the spot. Generally speaking, this flow will work for most businesses, but you might need to remove one step. You might need to add a step in.
Yeah.
So that's where you start to customize that. And then you start to allocate the systems into the different departments.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, then we move down to this bit. Now, you're going to come up with all of these great ideas of other things that could be systemized. You know, you'll go through a lot of Matt's work. You'll be looking online. You'll be listening to podcasts, and you'll hear all, oh, I need a referral system. I need a testimonial system. I need blah, 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 blah. Just put that all under the line in departments. And the rules of the game are you cannot touch any of these things down here until you've documented your CCF.
Okay.
CCF is what makes you money.
Okay.
Then we move down to whether or not you have team members or not. And this is going to be much more simplified if you're just looking at 3 different departments. You start to think about who is responsible for those, because then that helps you to identify who you need to go to get these captured, which happens in the next step.
So when you say captured, do you mean these are the people that are going to be creating the system?
No. So this is another area where a lot of people get mixed up and causes some issues. So when it comes to the extraction process, there are actually 2 roles here. There is the doing of the task and the recording, and then there is the actual documentation as well. And they're 2 separate tasks. So if you give this to a staff member who's already quite busy, or even the business owner, and they're required to, record themselves doing it, write out the detailed documentation, it just seems like this huge task in their head and they never get around to it. It's much easier to edit than it is to work from a blank page. So what we call them systemologist does, a systemologist works with the person identified who does the task. They get recorded doing it, and then the systemologist is a separate documenter. They go away, they do the documentation,
Gotcha.
They write out all of the bullet points, and then it goes back to the person for proofing. Because everybody likes to proof. Everybody loves to edit. No one likes to do stuff from scratch.
So in that example, would you have somebody within an organization whose job is basically to create the systems off the recording that someone had given them?
So depending on the size of the organization, they might be working with like a systemologist. Like we have a, let's say, a done for you type service that does that. Or they can, if they're a larger organization, they might identify what we call a systems champion. That's someone inside the team whose responsibility it is to do that. That said though, that typically speaking, only starts to work once you've got about 7 staff and up. When you're kind of smaller, it's hard to allocate one resource to be doing all of this documentation.
Of course.
Yeah. And a lot of the systemization, really, the benefit of it, at least in detail, only comes once you get a little bit larger anyway. And I'll show you 2 versions of systems. A system that someone might create if they were 1 and 2 and 3 staff, versus a system that might look like if you had a larger team, which would have much more detail. That extractor, the other area, I wouldn't have them on staff because you might not have enough time for them working full time to be working on that particular thing. But you could try and identify and find someone on Upwork and get them on a contract basis where you're doing it on a system by system basis.
Yeah, okay.
So then we kind of move to the next stage, which is the extraction phase. Now the extraction phase, and some people may have seen the system for creating systems. This is just a system. I mean, we give it away for free over at SystemHUB.com. All it is a way to teach people how to extract correctly. And if I go on here, we can see step 1 is to identify what's the result. Step number 2 is who's the best person to produce the result, which is effectively what we just did in step number 2 in the systemology process. Then you determine the method of capture, recording it, whatever. Then it needs to get recorded, and then you upload it into something like your video sharing service, and then that would get embedded into SystemHUB, or depending on where you're storing your documentation. And then you move through creating the step-by-step documentation, which typically speaking is a different person. and then it goes through the review process backwards and forwards. Now, someone sees this. I mean, this is what a good completed system looks like. You know, systems, videos embedded, and a full step-by-step. But you don't start here. You don't even have necessarily your, I'll just hit refresh here. You don't even necessarily have flow charts to start with. This is, if you're a small one-man band and it's your first system, systems would just look like this. Very simple, like none of the detail, any of the detail. You know, you might have a video that goes through it that shows the detail, but this is real basic steps. And then if you think about it, going back to the CCF, if you got your entire business mapped out like this, and then you went into, wherever you're going to store your systems and processes, and then you got them documented to this level, you would be worlds apart where you are, because now you give yourself a structure and a framework to work by.
Yeah.
And when you're only small one-man band, you don't need all of that detail, because the person probably who is doing it knows how to do it. So at least in that micro moment, to get this to this stage, that's step one. You then, over time, you do build it out, because you never want to be dependent on a staff member. If that staff member does leave, you don't want all of that IP to walk out. But if you've got the video of them doing it, that's a great step one before it starts getting taught. So the extraction process, really, it's just about following the system for creating systems. And one of the insights is to break up the documentation versus the doing of the task.
Yeah, I know that we're probably going to get into this, but there's a lot of systems out there that are made up of a series of steps. So, you know, for example, I mean, I've got like a podcast editing system, which is made up of, 30 odd different individual procedures. And so I'm guessing we'll get to this at some point, but then how you make sure that this one ties into that one, and this one ties into that one. And maybe you do it in like a mind map or whatever you call it there, a flowchart sort of scenario. But I think like that's another area where I think people get a bit confused. They're like, oh, well, there's so many steps to this. Steps to this. How do I break it down into bite-sized chunks so it's not overwhelming?
Yeah, and this probably flows in well to the organization. Really the organization is about how does your project management tool and your systems documentation tool integrate? How do you create what we call overview type systems as opposed to the real detailed how-to type systems? And once you see that come together, I think that the clarity will happen. So it starts off by getting out those critical systems and writing the main bullet points. One of the things that you're talking about particularly, let's say, if you got to delivery, for a lot of the listeners, when you get to delivery, that's a much more complex thing that you'll be talking about, where depending on the size of the job, there's probably a lot of different steps, and certain things are dependent on other things, and things need to be assigned. So the way that I think about it is you've got a project management tool like Asana handles who does what by when. That's all it should really do. It should be milestones, and oftentimes they're key milestones that might also be reflected in something like SystemHUB, where you've got your how-to document. So SystemHUB is where the systems documentation lives. This is the how-to. So let's say one of the steps was to do something. If you didn't know how to do it and it was quite a complex task, you might then have the complete training for that listed inside SystemHUB. And the reason you split the two, and this is really critical, is, and I've seen people to try and merge the two together, the problem is most documentation tools, if you're trying to check things off, then it doesn't do the project management very well, and it doesn't do the documentation very well. So because it doesn't do both, it doesn't solve either problem. If you try and get one that tries to do the two of it together, like you look at something like Asana, try and get how-to documents saved in there.
It's a nightmare.
You're in for a world of hurt. And then not only that, the updating it, the maintaining it, like it wasn't actually built for that. So I always really caution against people if they're trying to create checklists in your how-to system that need to be checked off, because then that starts to blur the lines between project management. Yeah. There needs to be a central source of truth that your project manager can go to go, hey, I know who is doing what, when it is due. I can tell, if it's been done as well, and they've checked it off. There has to be a central source of truth for that. Okay. So with that distinction, then how does it actually work together? And there's a few things to think about here. Firstly, and I'll use, we have a digital agency, that one I mentioned right at the start that Melissa runs. She's the CEO. And one of the things that we offer is videos. So we make web videos for businesses. So this is an overall process. So an overall process is almost more for the project manager. It kind of details top level what happens when the order a little bit more detailed. Now this would then also link potentially to other systems that help to explain certain steps. So for example, and you'll see it when we hop into the Asana, the discovery call, which is a step here, there is a system that relates to this step here that explains how to run a discovery call, but it's not listed in here because this is more for the project manager. So this system explains globally overall what the different phases are. This is just an overall view up the top here. There's a handover, then there's the initial onboarding, the discovery session, the shoot, the edit, and the delivery. And, we've got some rough timelines and things like that. So we've got here the salesperson, when they're ready to go, they'll send over the sales handover. And then, the accounts person steps in and sets up the project in Asana. And then if I scroll down here as well, this is a pretty epic system because it's the complete overall system. I come down here, here's the email template that the salesperson would send. They said, hey, great to chat earlier. I'm going to connect you with Sally. She'll be able to get you into the system. You're going to buy this. Here's your billing details. By the way, we bill 50% up front and 50% on completion. Then Sally would spot that, and then she goes, great. Well, I'm going to follow my bit, which is I need to set it up inside Asana, duplicate some of the tasks, which I'll show you in a sec, and then I need to send them an email. Great. Further to whoever sent the email, I'm going to invoice you up front, invoice you on completion. I've sent you an invoice via Xero, and I now want you to head over to this page to read some expectations.
So just while we're in here, so this to me looks like this is almost a checklist. Like there's email template 1, that's email template 2, but this isn't a checklist, is it? Because the checklist is in Asana.
Correct. So, and you'll see, so this is all how to.
Right.
So if I come into then, this, so this is, I'll just close this so we don't see any clients. So this is the way that this would work inside Asana. So I've got here on the left-hand side here, these are all of the different products and services that we offer. These are master templates. So what we do is when a client makes a purchase, they've got a project in here, we would duplicate one of these master templates into their account, and then this would get assigned to the project manager. And then you can see here, here's the overall system for a project manager. Here's the overall system for the videographer. We'll open up some of these. I mean, you've already seen I'll just come back here. You've already seen the overall system for the project manager. There's an overall system for the videographer as well.
Right.
And then what these are effectively the milestones that would relate that we saw. Now videos, it's quite complex, obviously, and there's lots of different steps. And TM stands for your team member, and PM as your project manager, so we know who's sort of responsible for what. But then I want to show you what happens. So let's say we've got our discovery call. Then I come in here. So let's say this got assigned to a team member or a videographer, and then they would get assigned this particular step and a set due date. There's a few notes in here, but if I come in here, everything that you need to know about pre-production, having the discovery call, and it suggests to have the system open. So we have over in here, this is how the discovery call works.
Right.
So if we come back to our project here, effectively what we have is, here is the main, we have an overall system that explains it to a brand new project manager if they're first time and they don't quite know what's going on. Same with the videographer. We have an overall system that kind of, where are we here? Overall system, is it this one? Here you go. This is the overall system that explains the discovery, the pre-production, the production. And you can see these link to the systems. So I think maybe one of the missing pieces that you're talking about are overall systems, where it kind of ties everything together but doesn't go into the uber detail. But you don't need the uber detail when you're having a look at the overall. You're just trying to understand the structure.
Right.
Where you need the uber detail is when you got assigned the task. Yep.
One thing, Dave, which I don't know if you can just clear it up for me now. Like looking at the structure in the SystemHUB, you've got all of the clear departments in the left-hand side there. So you got all your accounting, finance, admin, test, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff there. Then how does that then correlate or reflect your project management?
Yes. So if we jump into the project management,
from a structural perspective, like I'm just trying to line it all up.
Yep. So from a structural perspective, like think in terms of what a project management tool is here to do. Project management tool is who does what by when. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be project based. So inside your project management tool, it's organized based on project. So effectively what I'm linking to here, this is like the overall delivery. And then if something needs to be explained, then there is a link to the system that would explain how to do it. So okay. the structure, you're not going to have departments as much. I mean, we use departments a little bit differently. Like for example, I don't have a template one, so I'm cautious about jumping in and showing. Okay. We do have projects set up in Asana based on department, but that's more, so let's say we have our finance department, and our finance department has certain recurring tasks that might need to be done on a weekly and a monthly basis. So for example, recording, getting everything ready for BAS or reconciling accounts, let's say. That happens on a, weekly basis or something like that, depending on the business. There is a section for that, but that's part of the other departmental systems. Not what we're looking at here is the delivery of the product or the service.
Okay. I'm just trying to picture how that, like, if you're looking at a blank canvas in Asana, then what does, how does the, your side column or your navigation, I should say, in Asana, how does that look respective to, it's not so much departments then, it's more
client projects.
It's client projects, so you would have a client there in the sidebar, which could have a number of different templates applied to their job.
Correct. Like that. I will show you. Otherwise, it's just going to be hard for us to look. So let's find one. So let's look at Andico here.
So Andico would be a client?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So they have a master. We have a master template which houses all of the client information. So this would be, the contact person, any communications, accounting communications, and then under here, if they've ordered things, these are where I duplicate these master templates, and they get dragged into work in progress. And then you've got your project manager who is overseeing these.
Okay.
Then when you've got, hey, these are monthly tasks, and these are kind of like a bit more random tasks if things go on hold or completed.
Okay.
So we have a project per client. Gotcha. Now, like I said, we still do have different departments that live in here. And probably this is something that I'll show in the SystemOlogy event, the way that works. But I'm just talking at the moment around the delivery of the product or the service, which is effectively the CCF.
Okay.
When I was showing you before, and we go back to this is about, how do you actually get paid? You need to get all of that systemized and documented first before you start looking at your other department systems. Because if you jump into that, then you're going to be going, oh, I've got hundreds of systems I need to optimize and document before I really get any traction. Whereas using the CCF, really, we're just paring it down to 10 or 15.
So effectively what you've got is in the side column for your project management, you would have a whole bunch of templates based around your CCF, and then you would have your clients, and you would just copy, duplicate, and embed them into your client folder.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the CCF at the moment, when we did the first CCF, I just said, well, pick your first product.
Yeah.
Whereas, over time, you can see here, effectively, I've designed out CCFs for all of our products.
Yeah.
And usually most of the CCF, these ones here, they don't really get set up in Asana until we're moving into that, handover and delivery. All of these didn't include the CCF of our marketing, the conversion, the sales component. They only make it as a project once they become a client.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that help sort of clarify?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is, though, I know a common question that we get, like, how does it all look? Like what goes in? Because once you've got an understanding of how the navigation looks, then the rest of it's relatively, well, it's a lot simpler because you understand where you're putting things. But I think for a lot of the guys out there, and myself included, I've been struggling a little bit with that. How do you take something from your organizational chart and from your departments, and then how do you tie that into project? But it doesn't really, from what I'm gathering, it's not really that. It's not department based. It's more job.
Yeah. So this is another key distinction that was a big breakthrough, is the shifting away from being task driven to project driven. So when you're a one-man band, you'll have a big long to-do list of everything that needs to be done. And you're kind of working through that. And oftentimes, then you'll get a couple of team members and you're managing their to-do list, you're giving them tasks, you're checking back into them. When you actually have a shift is when you start to think in terms of roles and responsibilities. If you then say, rather than, hey, Jane, here's all of your accounting systems and processes that you have to be doing, and I'll top you up every single week, you shift to, hey, Jane, you are now responsible for these finance functions, then that becomes more project based, and the person starts to look after the client and the project and the deliverable rather than ticking off a particular task.
Okay.
Yeah. So the way that I organize it in SystemHUB here, yes, you'll see the different departments which would relate to the organizational chart things that we were talking about. I'll focus on operations, but we break that up into some of the different departments that we have within our business, and then there are more specific how-to. So that was the video, we're looking at the video production process, looking at pre-production, and now here are all of the systems related to pre-production.
Okay.
Now inside our Asana, these would be linked to the specific thing. Because if you think about it, when we start assigning, the project manager assigns the task, this would then appear in your team member's inbox with a set due date. Oftentimes, project management tools will sort based on due date. So they'll just start at the top of their list. And when they jump into that particular task, if they don't know how to do it, then they would click on the system that would explain how to do it. And then that jumps them back to, a system like this, which would step them through it. Yep, I know how to do it. And then they can jump back, complete the task and tick it. And then the project manager oversees everything to make sure that it gets assigned and who's next up. And, some project management can automatically do that as well. Like you have dependent tasks. And I think Asana might have recently added that in. So once something is completed, it triggers off the next step. Right. But for us, typically speaking, we like a project manager to oversee, because we give clients weekly updates, and that's part of the process for them to be able to hop in, see where something's up to, move anything along that needs to, make sure that no bottlenecks occur. I see some people, they try and systemize it too much. I saw that with actually might be a mutual friend of ours. I don't know if you know Troy Dean, but he had set up an in-depth process around podcasting, and he was using Podio that triggered each of the next different steps. And then the problem was happening when you go full automation, and usually that means no one's actually watching what happens. Yeah. If something then breaks down, 3 weeks goes by and someone goes, why didn't that actually get done? Oh, it got stuck here. Whereas I think that project manager role is key. Yeah. Cool. And then, we'll move into the tail end of this, because I know the plan was to break this up into a few calls. So we're kind of at that point. That's when you introduce the organizing, where the two come together. Then you move into optimization. So if you just capture what you're doing up until this point, when you start to optimize, it's all about setting. You need some metrics that are measured. You can get to optimize. You could get a consultant. They can come in, re-engineer a system and a process based on their experience and get you up to best practice. That's one way to do it. Or the other way is you have to have some sort of measurement where you're measuring key things. Usually it's cost, speed, and quality. Sometimes enjoyment of the process is in there as well for the client. But you measure those things, and then you can start to make improvements, but you have to then see, does that improvement affect that result? Like, you can't optimize without the measurement. And that's why most people end up optimizing too early, because they don't yet have a process mapped out. So how can you optimize something that isn't really clearly defined, which means then it's not consistent? Someone's doing one thing, another person's doing another thing.
So you basically need a benchmark from where to improve.
Exactly right. Just real basic recording. And then the integration piece, really that's getting the staff to buy in as early as possible, having them involved in the process, helping them to understand that what you're doing actually makes their job easier. They can then go away and have a sick day and know when they come back, tasks were done and they're not faced with an epic inbox. It reduces their stress. It makes it easier to share the load. So that comes with getting the buy-in, helping them to understand why you're doing it. And then there's some strategies to address specific things. And it's almost like a HR thing. You have to understand the staff member.
And I imagine that's number 6 would be massive. Like, there must be a lot of mindset and coaching and training that has to go into that stage.
It's one of the least addressed and understood areas, because you can have great systems and processes, but if no one's actually following them, they're not really worth anything anyway.
Exactly right.
So it's that is a huge part where that magic is, and it's not so much of an issue with new staff, because new staff, this is just the way they do it, and this is the way we've always done it. But for existing staff, as you transition, can take a little bit, and you want to treat your business. Every business really is a school. Mm-hmm. And you need to see yourself as a training organization, and you're training up your staff to complete the tasks.
Yeah.
And then the final step around scale, and we haven't even got to the point yet. Once you do your CCF, once all of that is documented, then you can start to look at some of those other systems. Some you already identified in step number 2. If you remember that that graphic, you probably came up with ideas on, once this loads, that's not the one. You might have already come up with ideas of other things that need to be systemized. You can come back to this part and revisit it. It usually starts around the HR side of things and management, but oftentimes as well, if you've got fires going on in the business, you might go, hey, we don't have enough leads. Okay, well, let's have a look at our CCF. We don't, have enough lead generation methods. Or, hey, we keep on, we're pumping out all of these quotes, but we're not actually converting any of them. We're just not getting any clients on board as a result. Okay, well, we need to revisit that particular part in the system. Hey, we're not getting enough people to repeat or refer. Okay, well, how can we then install systems that solve that problem? So growing your business becomes more of a game at that point. And it's identifying of issues and then installing a system that continually addresses that problem.
I like it.
So that's what we'll be going into in great detail. Obviously, we compressed quite a bit into a short amount of time. It was really just designed to give you a good overview of the SystemOlogy process. And at any one point in time, you just focus on the step you're in. That's the other key thing. Some people have this thing where they love to jump ahead. And I think it's first good to listen to something like this to get an overall, so you understand where things are going to hang. But once you understand overall roughly the direction you're headed, you have to focus in on just the step that you're at first and just complete that task. And if you're looking for education and training, or, you find the training that complements where you are at that point.
Right. Yeah.
Rather than going, hey, I need to be starting to think about, management systems, but I haven't even started documenting my critical client flow yet. Hang on, I'm getting way ahead of myself. I've got traction here, but I'm not going to read that just now because that's all about management stuff. I'll read that once I've done my CCF, and that just keeps you focused.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me.
G'day guys, it's Matt here. And so off the back of the recording that you've either just heard or just seen, Dave from SystemHUB has very generously offered a bit of a giveaway for you. So coming up on the 20th of April 2018, Dave is holding an event down in Melbourne called SystemOlogy, where he is running through in more depth basically what you heard just then. So we're diving a little bit more, well, a lot more into that wheel that you would have seen there with the different areas. And it's basically a training event where he's teaching people how they can implement those steps and those processes into their business in order to create a nice, thriving, scaling business. So the event itself is all but sold out, so I'm sorry, there's only a few tickets left to that, and if you want to get in there, you should head across to systemology.com and you can grab a ticket to that if it's available, but I don't think it is. However, the event is being recorded and the recordings are going to be for sale. Now, Dave has very generously offered for the first person to send in a copy of their critical client flow. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can refer back to the video where Dave has got an example of what a critical client flow would look like for a business. And you guys, that forms the foundation of your system. So that is where you would start with your systems. And Dave's offered to give the first person that sends it in correctly the free recording, access to those recordings, which is going to be fantastic. And if you haven't been to Dave's events before, they really are an amazing, just mind-blowing day, and they're packed full of information. So I would highly recommend that you get those. And you know what, even if you miss out, it'd be worth buying them anyway. So all those details will be available eventually once the event has been turned into a recording. However, that's the offer. So get across to and start creating your critical client flow and send it across to enquiries, ENQUIRIES at thesiteshed.com. That's inquiries with an E. We'll have a look at that. I'll send it off to Dave, and then whoever he thinks has done the best job wins the recording. So get to it.